Hello there, and welcome back to Dynamic Interactions. Our last video was about the anti-hero Peacemaker, and tonight we will talk about Vigilante. Before we head off to this amazing story, please like and subscribe to our channel. That way we know that you enjoyed our content. Also, comment below which comic book hero/villain you want to see next. Now take a deep breath, put on some comfy slippers, and enjoy. The mantle has been held by many. The name Vigilante is not tied to a single person, but rather is a mantle that has been adopted by a number of different individuals throughout DC Comics history. This tradition began with the original, Greg Saunders, a singing cowboy who first appeared in 1941. He used his skills with a lariat and his fists to fight crime in the urban landscape of New York City. The legacy continued with the second vigilante, Adrian Chase, a lawyer and district attorney from the 1980s who took up the cow after his family was killed by mobsters. His journey was a tragic one, defined by a struggle with the morality of his actions and his own mental health. Later, an even more brutal and unforgiving version of the character emerged in the form of Dorian Chase, Adrian's brother, who operated with a cold and ruthless efficiency. Other characters like Pat Trace and Justin Powell also took on the name, each bringing their own motivations and methods to the role, demonstrating how the name Vigilante has evolved from a symbol of old-school justice to one that represents a darker, more complex, and often more violent form of retribution. The original Vigilante was a cowboy. The first and original Vigilante was a Golden Age hero named Greg Saunders. He was a master of hand-to-hand combat and a skilled horseman. This character, whose name was initially spelled Greg Sanders, first appeared in Action Comics number 42 in 1941. The son of a Wyoming sheriff, Saunders moved to New York City to become a country singer, earning the nickname the Prairie Troubadour. When his father was killed by a gang of bandits, he returned home to bring them to justice. He then continued his crime-fighting career in New York, using his Western skills, including his proficiency with a lariat and a revolver, to fight crime in the city. He was one of the few Golden Age heroes to have a continuous run in comics until 1954, and was also a member of one of the earliest superhero teams, the Seven Soldiers of Victory. Other notable vigilantes. Beyond the most prominent figures, the mantle has been worn by others who have left their mark. Pat Trace became a vigilante in the 1990s, taking up the role after working for the government as an enforcer. Her story explored the blurred lines between sanctioned violence and personal justice. More recently, Justin Powell appeared as a vigilante in the 1 Year Later storyline, a corrupt and manipulative figure who used the name for his own nefarious purposes, proving that the mantle is not always a force for good. His story highlighted how a symbol of hope and justice can be twisted and corrupted. Greg Saunders was a country singer. In his civilian identity, Greg Saunders was a successful country singer known as the Prairie Troubadour. Born the son of a Wyoming sheriff, Greg Saunders left his Western roots behind to pursue a career in music in the bustling metropolis of New York City. His stage name, the Prairie Troubadour, was a nod to his upbringing. As a popular radio singer, he would entertain audiences across the country with his country and Western ballads. This dual identity allowed him to move through different social circles and gather information, as he was a beloved public figure by day and a masked crime fighter by night. The Vigilante's adventures often blended the urban setting of New York City with the skills and sensibilities of the American West, making him a unique hero in the golden age of comics. While he fought against modern criminals and gangsters, his methods, including his proficiency with a lasso, his hand-to-hand combat skills, and his marksmanship with a revolver, all reflected his cowboy persona. His guitar wasn't just for music either. He often hid tools and even a gun inside of it, transforming his instrument into another crime-fighting tool. This combination of old-school cowboy charm and urban justice set him apart from his contemporaries. His stories were often filled with music, with song lyrics and musical themes woven into the narratives. He would use his fame to his advantage, gaining access to places and people that his vigilante identity couldn't, proving that his musical talent was just as important to his success as his fighting skills. A golden age sidekick. Greg Saunders had a young sidekick named Stuff, the Chinatown Kid, who assisted him in his crime-fighting efforts. Stuff, whose real name was Daniel "Danny" Leong, was introduced in Action Comics number 45 in 1942. He was a young Chinese-American boy who, like Vigilante, fought crime without superpowers. The two heroes first met when a Japanese spy, the Head, attempted to frame Stuff's grandfather for a Tong War in New York City's Chinatown. After working together to clear his family's name, Stuff became Vigilante's permanent sidekick. He was a prominent character throughout the Vigilante's Golden Age run, staying with him until the feature was canceled in 1954. Stuff also had a brief stint as a member of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, a team that Vigilante was also a part of, though in that series, Stuff was replaced by another sidekick named Billy Gunn. This partnership between the two heroes was a testament to the cultural diversity of the time and was unique as one of the few instances of an Asian American character being a prominent sidekick in the Golden Age. In later stories, a tragic fate awaited Stuff as he was murdered, with two conflicting accounts for his death. One version states he was killed by the gangster Bugsy Siegel, while another claims his life was taken by Vigilante's arch-nemesis, the Dummy. His death was a pivotal moment in the character's history, symbolizing the shift from the lighthearted Golden Age to the darker, more complex narratives of the modern era of comics. Adrian Chase's tragic origin. The most well-known vigilante is Adrian Chase, a New York City district attorney who takes up the brutal vigilante persona. Adrian Chase's tragic origin. The most well-known vigilante is Adrian Chase, a New York City district attorney who takes up the brutal vigilante persona after his wife and two children are killed by a mob bomb intended for him. Adrian Chase first appeared in The New Teen Titans number 23 in 1982 and became Vigilante in a subsequent issue. As a district attorney, he was dedicated to his job, but grew disillusioned as he saw criminals escape justice due to legal loopholes. His quest to prosecute the Scarapelli crime family led to a retaliatory bombing of his home, which resulted in the death of his wife, Doris Chase, and his two children. This event consumed him and led him to abandon the legal system and adopt the identity of the Vigilante, a one-man judge, jury, and executioner. Chase's journey was a descent into darkness, a stark contrast to the heroic adventures of the original Vigilante, Greg Saunders. He was a deeply conflicted hero, tormented by the lethal nature of his actions and constantly questioning whether he was doing as much damage as the criminals he hunted. He even briefly retired from the role, trying to find a normal life, but the trauma of his past and the lure of justice always pulled him back in. His story became a powerful exploration of the morality of vigilantism and the psychological toll it takes on a person. Ultimately, the guilt and mental anguish proved too much for him to bear, and in a tragic act, he took his own life, ending one of the most compelling and tragic stories in DC Comics history. A Punisher-like anti-hero. The most well-known vigilante is Adrian Chase, a New York City district attorney who takes up the brutal vigilante persona after his wife and 2 children are killed by a mob bomb intended for him. His origin story, created by writer Marv Wolfman and artist George Perez in the early 1980s, was a stark departure from the lighthearted adventures of Greg Saunders and was explicitly designed as a darker, more conflicted take on the vigilante archetype. Unlike the Punisher, who is often portrayed as a single-minded instrument of vengeance, Adrian Chase was a deeply tormented figure. While he started his crusade by trying to avoid lethal force, his mental state deteriorated as his violence escalated, and he began to question the morality of his actions. This internal conflict was the central theme of his solo series, Vigilante, 1983 to 1988, which chronicled his descent into madness. He would swing between bouts of rage and profound remorse, even going so far as to briefly abandon his vigilante identity and try to find happiness as a husband and father again. But the trauma of his past and the lure of justice always pulled him back. It was a powerful and unflinching cautionary tale about the psychological cost of vigilantism, exploring the idea that no one can commit violent acts without it taking a toll on their psyche. The series was praised for its gritty realism and its willingness to address the grim consequences of vigilantism. In the end, the guilt and mental anguish proved too much for him to bear, and in a tragic act, he took his own life, ending one of the most compelling and tragic stories in DC Comics history and cementing Adrian Chase as one of the publisher's most complex and compelling anti-heroes. He had a healing factor. Adrian Chase possesses a regenerative healing factor that allows him to recover from serious injuries, like gunshots and stabbings, more quickly than a normal human. This ability, which he acquired after undergoing intensive training with mystical spirits, is not without its limitations. While he can heal from a typical stabbing or gunshot wound, he is not invincible and can still be killed if the injuries are severe enough. For example, his healing powers were not enough to save him from a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. This regenerative ability is one of the key differences between Adrian Chase and the more grounded cowboy hero Vigilante who preceded him. This healing factor was a narrative tool that allowed writers to put Vigilante through more brutal and intense battles without killing him off in every issue. It also served to further distinguish him from other street-level heroes and anti-heroes in the DC universe. While other characters like Batman rely on skill and gadgets, and the Punisher relies on sheer force, Vigilante could take a seemingly fatal amount of damage and keep going. This ability underscored his determination and his unwavering, if often misguided, commitment to his brand of justice. It also made his eventual death all the more tragic, as it was not a result of a physical defeat, but a psychological one. The suicide of Adrian Chase. In a poignant and tragic storyline, Adrian Chase becomes so tormented by his violent actions and the guilt of his career that he takes his own life in the final issue of his solo comic series, Vigilante, number 50. This grim conclusion, published in February 1988, was the culmination of a long and harrowing psychological descent. Adrian Chase's mental state had been in a free fall throughout the series, a result of his constant internal struggle with the morality of his lethal crusade. His guilt was compounded by the actions of 2 other individuals, a judge named Alan Wells and a bailiff named Dave Winston, who took on the vigilante identity during Adrian's brief retirements from the role. When both men met tragic ends, one at Adrian's own hands and the other at the hands of Peacemaker, Adrian was further consumed by the belief that his legacy was one of ruin and death for anyone who came close to him. The final issue shows Adrian at his lowest point, After accidentally killing a police captain, his mounting guilt and remorse become unbearable. He realizes that the only way to stop the bloodshed he has caused and the pain he has inflicted on those around him is to end his own life. The series concludes with a somber and powerful final image, Adrian's gravestone, a stark reminder of the tragic consequences of his life as a vigilante. His death is one of the rare instances in mainstream superhero comics where a major character has remained dead, cementing his story as a powerful and enduring cautionary tale about the psychological cost of vengeance. A judge and a hero. After initially abandoning the vigilante identity, Adrian Chase becomes a judge, believing he can do more good from the bench. However, circumstances force him to reclaim the mask. Adrian's decision to become a judge was a direct result of his deep-seated guilt and a desire to return to a life of legitimate justice. He had become disillusioned with his violent crusade, especially after a particularly brutal incident where he nearly killed an innocent man. He believed that by working within the legal system, he could find a way to make a difference without resorting to lethal force. He even presided over the trial of the supervillain Deathstroke, a role that brought him back into the world of costumed heroes. However, his attempts to live a normal life were thwarted by the vigilante mantle itself. During his absence, two different individuals, his friend and fellow judge Alan Wells and his bailiff Dave Winston, took on the identity. Wells, a mentally unstable man, used the name for a more violent and indiscriminate campaign, while Winston, an idealist, sought to use the name to inspire fear without killing. When Chase was forced to confront and kill Wells to stop his rampage, and Winston was subsequently killed by Peacemaker, Adrian felt responsible for the blood on their hands. Believing his original crusade had caused a chain reaction of tragedy, he returned to the vigilante persona, thinking that the only way to prevent more people from dying was to resume the role himself. This cycle of abandoning and reclaiming the mask became a central theme of his tragic arc, showing how the weight of his actions and the name Vigilante would forever haunt him. The mantle's tragic legacy. During Adrian Chase's absence, two of his friends, a fellow judge named Alan Wells and a bailiff named Dave Winston, briefly take up the vigilante mantle, both meeting tragic ends. The story of Adrian Chase's vigilante is not just his own, but a tragic chain reaction that spread to those around him. The first to take up the mantle was Alan Wells, a fellow judge and colleague of Chase who was suffering from a nervous breakdown. Wells's take on the vigilante was far more unhinged and brutal, killing indiscriminately and terrifying the public he was meant to protect. Adrian, horrified by this monstrous reflection of himself, was forced to hunt down his former friend, ultimately killing him in self-defense. The second vigilante was Dave Winston, Adrian's idealistic bailiff who had been inspired by Adrian's original crusade. Unlike Wells, Winston vowed to be a hero who would not kill, using the reputation of the vigilante to intimidate criminals. However, this non-lethal approach proved fatal. During a plane hijacking, Winston's attempt to subdue a group of terrorists put him in the path of the villain Peacemaker, who, seeing him as a threat, killed him. Winston's death, much like Wells's, solidified Adrian's belief that his legacy was one of sorrow and death, a burden that would ultimately lead to his own demise. Killed by a friend. One of the most tragic moments in Vigilante's history is when Adrian Chase unknowingly kills his friend, Alan Wells, who had become a deranged and violent vigilante. The tragic sequence of events began after Adrian, plagued by guilt and the psychological toll of his crusade, decided to abandon the vigilante identity to become a judge. He believed he could contribute more to justice from within the legal system. However, his friend and fellow judge, Alan Wells, who was suffering from a nervous breakdown, saw Adrian throw away his costume and took it as a sign that he was meant to carry on the work. Wells became a far more brutal and indiscriminate version of the character, killing petty criminals and even a police officer. Adrian, unaware that it was Wells behind the mask, felt responsible for the new violent vigilante and began to hunt him. In a final, fateful confrontation, Adrian shot and killed Wells. It was only after unmasking him that Adrian realized he had murdered his own friend, a horrifying discovery that plunged him into a deeper abyss of grief and madness. This event solidified Adrian's belief that his existence as vigilante brought nothing but tragedy to those around him, setting him on a path that would ultimately lead to his own suicide. Another vigilante killed by Peacemaker. The third person to hold the vigilante identity, Dave Winston, is killed by Peacemaker during a plane hijacking. This event is what drives Adrian Chase to take up the mantle once again. Dave Winston, Adrian's bailiff and a good friend, was an idealist. Inspired by Adrian's earlier, more restrained form of vigilantism, Winston took up the mantle with the vow that he would never kill. He sought to use the vigilante's reputation to intimidate criminals rather than execute them. His first major test came when he attempted to stop a plane hijacking. Unfortunately, this mission put him in direct conflict with Peacemaker, a psychologically disturbed anti-hero who believed in achieving peace through overwhelming force, no matter the cost. Seeing Winston as a threat to his own mission, Peacemaker didn't hesitate to kill the non-lethal vigilante. The news of Dave Winston's death at the hands of another anti-hero, no less, shattered Adrian. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, believing that Winston's death was a direct consequence of his own actions and his decision to create the vigilante identity in the first place. The tragedy solidified his belief that the vigilante mantle was a curse that brought death to anyone who wore it or came too close to it. He resolved to reclaim the costume, believing that the only way to prevent more people from dying was to bear the burden himself, setting him on the final, tragic path that would lead to his own death. A female vigilante. A woman named Patricia Pat Trace, a Gotham City police detective, also becomes vigilante. She works with Deathstroke and is portrayed as enjoying her time as the anti-hero. Pat Trace was a former freelance operative for the covert government agency Checkmate, who first appeared in Deathstroke the Terminator #6 in 1991. After Adrian Chase's death, she found his spare costume and gear, and instead of taking it to the authorities, she decided to take up the mantle herself. Unlike the morally conflicted and tormented Adrian Chase, Pat Trace embraced the vigilante identity with a sense of enjoyment and swagger. She was a skilled martial artist and marksman, often working alongside and even entering a romantic relationship with the mercenary Deathstroke. Her time as vigilante marked a departure from the dark and psychologically complex themes of Adrian Chase's run, instead focusing on high-octane action and a more bad girl attitude. Her story highlights how the vigilante name, which began as a symbol of justice, could be adopted by someone with a more pragmatic and even selfish motivation. Pat's tenure as vigilante was less about a tormented quest for justice and more about a life of adventure and danger. She was portrayed as a highly capable and effective crime fighter, but one who was not afraid to cross moral lines for her own gain or to protect those she cared about. Her relationship with Deathstroke further blurred the lines between hero and villain, as she often found herself in the middle of his morally ambiguous missions. After her time as vigilante, she eventually retired from the role, though she would occasionally return to the hero world. Her story serves as a fascinating contrast to Adrian Chase's, demonstrating the versatility of the vigilante mantle and how it can be molded to fit a wide range of personalities and motivations, from a tragic hero to a thrilling anti-hero. Her time as vigilante also saw her join the Forgotten Heroes, a group of forgotten Golden and Silver Age heroes. Part of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, the original vigilante Greg Saunders was a member of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, an early superhero team that also included characters like Green Arrow and Speedy. The Seven Soldiers of Victory, also known as the Law's Legionnaires, were a superhero team that first appeared in Leading Comics #1 in 1941. The team was DC Comics' second major superhero group, following the Justice Society of America. The lineup was comprised of heroes whose solo features were running in DC's anthology titles: Vigilante, Green Arrow and his sidekick Speedy, the Crimson Avenger, the Shining Knight, and the duo of Star-Spangled Kid and Stripesy. Interestingly, despite the team's name, they were often considered to have 8 members due to the inclusion of the sidekicks Stripesy and Speedy in the lineup. The Crimson Avenger's partner, Wing, was also unofficially part of the team's adventures, further complicating the 7 count. Greg Saunders' own sidekick, Stuff the Chinatown Kid, was not a member of the team in the original stories. In the Leading Comics stories, Vigilante was instead partnered with a different character named Billy Gunn. The team's adventures often involved them splitting up to fight different parts of a larger villainous plot, only to come back together to defeat the main mastermind. This group was brought back into the main DC continuity in later years, and Vigilante even appeared as a character in Grant Morrison's 2005 Seven Soldiers maxi series, where he attempted to form a new version of the team, only to be seemingly killed. His final appearance in that series as a ghost was a somber but fitting end for the Golden Age hero. A member of Checkmate. Adrian Chase has been affiliated with the covert government organization Checkmate in the comics. Adrian Chase's association with Checkmate is a notable but often overlooked part of his history. Before the organization was officially known as Checkmate, it was the precursor agency known as the Agency, which first appeared in Vigilante number 36 in 1986. The Agency was a clandestine offshoot of Amanda Waller's Task Force X, created to perform operations vital to the security of American interests. After the tragic conclusion of his solo series, Adrian Chase found himself working with the Agency in a limited capacity. This connection to a government organization provides a fascinating contrast to his vigilante persona, highlighting his dual existence as a man who operated outside the law, but was still recognized and, in some way, utilized by the very system he had abandoned. His time with Checkmate further explored the blurred lines between hero, anti-hero, and government operative that defined his complex character. This affiliation, though brief, adds another layer to the tragedy of Adrian Chase, as he was a man who, despite his best efforts, was unable to escape the violent world he had created for himself. A different take in Peacemaker. The HBO Max series Peacemaker presents a drastically different version of Adrian Chase, portraying him as a psychopathic but comically charming and loyal sidekick, a stark departure from his dark and tormented comic book counterpart. While the live-action series, written and directed by James Gunn, maintains a comic-accurate costume, the character of Adrian Chase, portrayed by Freddie Stroma, is a complete reinvention. Instead of a tormented district attorney driven to vengeance, this version is a socially awkward busboy and self-proclaimed crime fighter who idolizes Peacemaker. He lacks the tragic origin story of his comic book counterpart, and is instead a cheerful, almost naive sociopath with a penchant for violence and a disturbing lack of empathy. Gunn's reinterpretation of the character was a deliberate choice, born from his belief that for someone to become a vigilante, they would have to be unhinged to begin with. The show's version of Adrian Chase is a bizarre blend of homicidal tendencies and a desperate need for friendship, particularly with Peacemaker, whom he views as his best friend and role model. His antics provide much of the show's dark humor, from his misguided attempts at a friendship to his disturbing justifications for murder. This portrayal stands in direct contrast to the grim, self-destructive path of the comic book Adrian Chase, whose story was a cautionary tale about the psychological cost of vengeance. The show's version, in a way, is what the comics version might have become if he had fully embraced his violent tendencies without the accompanying guilt and remorse. The show also incorporates a version of his healing factor, but reimagines it as an advanced but not instantaneous ability to recover from minor injuries, allowing him to survive being stabbed or shot. His signature catchphrase, "Too low, low, low," a tribute to a viral internet meme, further highlights the show's comedic and bizarre take on the character. A villain in Arrow. The CW television series Arrow used a different take on the character. Adrian Chase was actually the primary villain, Prometheus, and Vigilante was a separate character named Vincent Sobol. This decision was a deliberate misdirection by the show's writers to surprise both comic book fans and casual viewers. When the character of Adrian Chase, played by Josh Segarra, was introduced in Season 5, he was presented as a district attorney and an ally to Oliver Queen, much like his comic book counterpart. At the same time, a new masked figure, Vigilante, appeared on the scene, leading many to believe that Chase was the man behind the mask. The show leaned into this, dropping subtle clues and even having Vigilante and Chase appear in separate places at the same time to throw off suspicion. The big reveal was a major plot twist. Adrian Chase was not Vigilante, but was in fact the season's main antagonist, Prometheus. Prometheus's motivation was a personal vendetta against Oliver Queen for killing his father, a man on Oliver's original list from his time as the Hood. Chase's goal was to methodically dismantle Oliver and lend him to his death by committing suicide on a boat which triggered a series of bombs on the island of Lian-Yu, which destroyed the island and all of Oliver's loved ones on it. The show's Vigilante, Vincent Sobol, was a Central City police officer who gained a regenerative healing factor after being exposed to the dark matter from the particle accelerator explosion. He was also the former partner and boyfriend of Dinah Drake, the new Black Canary. He was a more ruthless character than Dinah, believing that criminals deserved to be killed. His eventual death at the hands of Black Siren was a tragic moment that further developed Dinah's character. A reflective character. Vigilante's stories, particularly those of Adrian Chase, were created to explore the moral and psychological toll of vigilantism and challenge the traditional heroic tropes of the time. The introduction of Adrian Chase's Vigilante in the 1980s was a direct response to a changing cultural landscape, both in comics and in the real world. The rise of the street-level anti-hero, a figure who operated in the morally ambiguous gray areas of justice, was a popular trend during this period, with characters like Marvel's Punisher leading the way. However, while the Punisher's stories often celebrated his brutal methods, the Vigilante comic series took a more critical approach. The series was designed as a deconstruction of the superhero genre, forcing readers to question the motivations and consequences of private justice. Adrian's journey was not one of catharsis, but of self-destruction. His use of violence was a constant source of internal conflict, and the series did not shy away from showing the mental and emotional toll his actions took on him. Writers Marv Wolfman and Alan Moore, in their seminal work V for Vendetta, explored similar themes, using the vigilante figure as a way to reflect on the nature of justice and the legitimacy of the state. Adrian's story mirrored the real-world anxieties of the 1980s, a time when public frustration with crime and a distrust of the legal system led to a cultural fascination with figures like Bernard Goetz, the subway vigilante. The comic series, in a way, was a fictional exploration of the dangers of this mindset. It demonstrated that taking the law into one's own hands, no matter how justified the initial impulse, could lead to a downward spiral of violence and madness, with devastating consequences for both the vigilante and those around them. An expert in combat, all versions of Vigilante are highly skilled fighters, marksmen, and tactical geniuses, using a variety of firearms and gadgets to dispense their brand of justice. Across the different individuals who have held the Vigilante mantle, a consistent set of skills has been their hallmark. The original Vigilante, Greg Saunders, was a masterful brawler and sharpshooter, but his true signature skills came from his cowboy persona. He was an expert horseman, a master of the lariat, a skill he used to both disarm and capture his opponents, and a trick shooter who could disarm enemies with a single well-placed shot from his revolver. The most well-known vigilante, Adrian Chase, was also a superb hand-to-hand combatant and marksman. Unlike Greg Saunders, who relied on a more traditional Western style, Adrian's skills were more modern and brutal. He was trained by the Agency and was shown to be able to go toe-to-toe with some of the DC Universe's most formidable fighters, even holding his own against Nightwing and Batman. Adrian also had a regenerative healing factor, which allowed him to recover from injuries that would have killed a normal person. His fighting style was a reflection of his psyche, aggressive, violent, and uncompromising. Pat Trace, another vigilante, was also a highly skilled operative. As a former member of the covert agency Checkmate, she was a master of martial arts and weapons expert. Her fighting style was a more professional and tactical one, honed by her time in Black Ops. This collective proficiency in combat, whether it's the old-school cowboy style of Greg Saunders or the lethal modern tactics of Adrian Chase, is a defining trait of the vigilante identity. Still dead in main continuity. Unlike many comic book characters, Adrian Chase has largely remained dead since his suicide in 1988, with his appearances since then being limited to stories set in the afterlife or flashbacks. Adrian Chase's death in Vigilante number 50 stands as a rare and significant moment in comic book history. While it is common for major characters to be killed and resurrected, Adrian Chase's death has, for the most part, stuck. His suicide was the tragic conclusion of a psychological journey, and writers and editors at DC Comics have largely respected that finality. The decision to keep him dead has preserved the powerful and poignant ending of his solo series, ensuring that the story of his descent into madness and ultimate self-destruction remains an impactful cautionary tale. His appearances since then have been in limited, non-canonical, or afterlife stories, such as in the Day of Judgment miniseries, where he is seen in purgatory alongside other heroes, battling the Guardians of the Realm. His portrayal in media like the television series Arrow and Peacemaker are different versions of the character, existing in separate continuities and not affecting his status in the main DC Comics universe. The commitment to his death in the main continuity serves to underscore the moral weight and serious tone of his character arc, a story that was always about the tragic consequences of vigilante